and I'll let you know once we're streaming.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Adler.
Does that have to be to the table or?
Push it all the way up to the table. Yep. So we can get all of you in there. All right, we are streaming.
All right, I have 5:50. I will call the meeting to order. If everyone would stand for the moment of silence and the pledge. If you face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Recorder, if you call the roll.
Chair Laura Harrison.
Present.
Vice Chair Jeremy Burnett.
Here.
Keith Acton.
Present.
Michelle Childs.
Here.
Deborah Thomas.
Present.
I would like to welcome everyone to our February business meeting. This is our only meeting this month, just a reminder to the board and to the public that due to the TSBA, I don't know their
Legislative and Legal Institute.
their new title or newer title. We only have one meeting this month, so just reminding the public and the board of that. Mr. Superintendent, will you lead us through our agenda?
I will. The first item on the agenda is the opportunity for public comment.
Would anyone from the public like to speak? Hearing none, next item.
Next item is our report section, starting with our legislative liaison update. Michelle Childs.
Ms. Childs, the floor is yours.
Yes. There's not anything groundbreaking because I already, I think we all closely followed what happened, but I will briefly mention that, as I talked about in our special session last week, that the General Assembly had gone into a special session and did, with a very swiftness, pass the school voucher scholarship bill, which is expected to be signed by the governor. It will primarily be used by current private school students, but they've assured us it will not affect our funding. There were some concerns that we had about this bill, but it will be law soon, so we will see what that looks like. The special session ended on Thursday, last Thursday, January 30th, and they are back in regular session now.
Any questions, Ms. Childs? Hearing none, next item.
Next item is the superintendent's report. I do have a few things I want to share, but before we do that, the main and most important part of my report is recognizing some individuals who have achieved distinction in Lakeland school system among our faculty in particular. So let me change the view here on the stream real quick, and we will get those up here. Okay.
Does the board want to go down too as well?
Sure. If you want to come on down, you certainly may. So this is always an exciting recognition to give, but we have 3 teachers who have achieved distinction in the Lakeland school system by being recognized by a combination of their peers and their administration as Lakeland school system's representatives for Teacher of the Year for Lakeland school system. And now that we have our high school grades, we have 3 out of the 4 high school grades at least. We give these in 3 different categories. We have a K-4 Teacher of the Year. We have a 5 through 8 or Middle School Teacher of the Year. And then we have a High School Teacher of the Year. And we could not have better representatives than we have this year. We're so excited about all 3 of these individuals. Yeah, give them a round of applause. I'll tell you who they are shortly. Like I said, these are folks who, it starts with peer recognition, and then it goes on to the administration, and the administration makes the decision on the folks that they believe for this year would best represent the school and the school system, and each of these will move on to the state Teacher of the Year competition. So in any respect, we're very excited to recognize these folks, and I know the principals especially were excited to make sure that they get these very deserved recognitions. So for our K through 4 Teacher of the Year, we want to recognize Kristen Connerly. So come on up, Ms. Connerly. And we're going to have you come back up in just a second, okay? So if you want to sit down, we'll do this, then we'll get all the group pictures. For our 5 through 8 Teacher of the Year, this is somebody that's been rocking it at back when it was Lakeland Middle Preparatory School. She's been getting the job done there in the Spanish and Foreign Language Department and has continued to do great things as we have grown and expanded. One of the true foundations of our foreign language program at Lakeland Prep, so I'm so excited that she was recognized. But we want to bring up Heather Hainwald de Rios. We'll get more pictures in just a second. And then finally, an individual who joined us when we opened our high school and is the founding director of the Lakeland Preparatory High School Theater Program. And in a short time, he's already become an award-winning director in our program and made sure that we have an award-winning theater department. It works hard, loves kids, and puts on great productions. And that is our 9 through 12 Teacher of the Year, Jeff White. So what we'd love to do is just one by one, we want to get, you can stay up here, we'll go in reverse order at this point. If we want to get the school board members up and any members of the Lakeland Prep Administration that want to come up, Ms. DeLoso, if you want to come up and be in this picture, that would be great. I'm going to move this again, and then we'll move it back for...
I saw you get
All right, we're going to trade out. Ms. Rios, if you want to come up here. Yeah, and the families, you can come on up too. You want to come up? And we can send you. It takes all the family. Yeah. All right. Ms. Connolly, come on up. We've got a big supporter. Love is in the house. Love for this time. Right. Congratulations, everybody. Thank y'all. And it will also not be rude of you if you decide to leave, but you're more than welcome. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
It's warm tonight. Somebody's starving. I think it's because I went back there and smelled that damn chicken. There you go. Popped up. Roast is going to be even better. Ever do the Mississippi roast? Yeah. Ranch. I don't do a stick of them.
Something moved when you did that earlier. I don't know.
Roast has got plenty of fat in it. You don't need a stick of
There
it.
you go.
That work?
There you go.
Yes.
All right, let me switch the layout here.
All that happy energy, and then it's just left with us. We
I know.
My favorite part,
got Mr. Adler, though.
I know,
That's
my favorite part is you can tell, like, what school each is from, because there's that friendly rivalry of, like, yelling for your LES or LPS groups, you know? So I love it. I love all the energy and the loyalty to the comrades.
Yes.
All right, just a few more things to report. I'll keep it brief, but just to give an update, we will open registration for new returning and kindergarten students on March 3rd, so about a month from now. We'll get that process up and running, and that runs through March 28th. So we can start getting a better handle on what our numbers might look like for next year, although we've already gotten our projections, and they've tended to be very, very accurate over the last few years. So we thank Jerome McKibben for doing that. A lot of great work going on in the instruction department, particularly with a focus on math. Just wanted to note that. I appreciate the work that's been done by Ms. Deloso and the academic leadership team there, and particularly making sure that our new math curriculum materials are being put to good use. We've had several new firsts. It seems like every year and every month there's new firsts in Lakeland Prep and Lakeland School System, but we want to congratulate the inaugural members of the National Technical Honor Society, which is a first. So we've got another group of honor students. Had a lot of award winners in the Mid-South Scholastic Art Awards in our art department. And then we had some students for a local Technology Student Association TSA regional event that competed and did very, very well. And some of those students have earned a trip to state as well. So we're excited for and about those students as well. We've got, there's a special education parent training that's going to be really the first of its kind that's being put on by our SPED director, Rachel Gay, on February 12th. There's 2 in-person options at 9:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. They're both in the LPS library, so just trying to make sure that folks are are able to come. So we've got morning and evening options there. Want to highlight again the Lions Den podcast, which has been a great collaboration between our coordinated school health and student services departments to make sure all the good work that's being done in Lakeland School System is getting out. This one features Tammy Wilson, who is our CTE director, among many other things. So we appreciate that for sure. So lots of things going on. We will be out for President's Day. The students will be out. We'll have a day of professional development on February 17th. So students are out, but teachers and staff for the most part are in. Parent-teacher conferences are February 14th, and got any number of orchestra, band, and choir concerts coming up in February. So as always, it's just a busy, busy time, but we're very proud of all the work that's happening. So happy to share that as always. In addition to that, the monthly financial summary is available, and I'll certainly take any questions that the board members may have on any of those things.
Anyone have any questions for the superintendent? Hearing none, next item.
Next item is the approval of the agenda.
Can I get a motion to get this item on the floor?
So moved.
If a motion, I'll second. Is there anything anyone would like to remove or add to the agenda? Is there any changes, anything anyone would like to make to the agenda?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move item number 2 from the discussion action item to the consent agenda.
Is that a motion?
That is a motion.
All right, I'll second. Any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been amended. Is there we're back on the amended agenda. I'll get it right. Back on the amended agenda, the whole agenda. Is there any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the amended agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. Next item.
Next item is the actual consent agenda, which now has 3 items on it.
I'll make a motion to get this item on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda is approved. Next item.
Next item, we move to our discussion and action items. The first item is a Benchmark 2 presentation by our Director of Data Assessment and Accountability, Matt Adler.
Mr. Adler, we love when you come. Tons of data.
Good evening. First of all, you are very appreciated. I appreciate you for allowing me to come here to discuss data. And mainly for the public, this is more for the public because you already know this, is the benchmark data is a snapshot in time of how our students are progressing towards goals, how they're progressing towards success rates, achievement, towards TCAP, and to highlight areas that can be reinforced, but also areas that need a little bit more support. Tonight's presentation, I'm going to give an overview of where we are this year, where we stood in terms of the 3-year trend for our TCAP data and how it compares to our benchmark data. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because arrows can be read and numbers can be read as well. But I also want to focus on goals and school plan goals in terms of, are we making progress towards the end goal, which we may or may not be there yet, but if we're progressing towards it, it's a good sign and it's a good indication of what we're doing at the school level. The other thing is I'm including some slides in terms of how students are meeting or exceeding expectations, and I'll explain a little bit more about that because it's based on projections. It's not based on actual success rates of those kids. So if a student, for example, is projected to be a 2, and they're making 2s on the benchmark, they're meeting their expectation, or 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And those equate to below expectations, approaching expectations, met expectations, or exceeding expectations. So when I get to those slides, I'll focus a little bit more time on that. So. And then at the very end, some recommendations, some of the same and some additional recommendations based on this data. So our second benchmark was taken in the first week of December. The window closed on December 11th. That data came back right before we went to winter break. So we had some time to process and get it in the teachers' hands by the time they came back after winter break. The grades tested, of course, are still 2 through 11. The achievement content areas are ELA, Math, Science, and Social Studies. Not all 4 are tested in all grades, but all of those subjects are tested. And then our EOC content areas are all the same except for the additional U.S. history, which we added this year for our juniors. Some data resources that I haven't talked about, but I want to give insight to what we provide our teachers, because over the last 3 years, it truly has become a data-driven system. Teachers are using these numbers, they're looking at item analyses, they're looking at how their students are progressing in certain standards, how they're mastering some, if they're retaining or not, and it's all because of those master review predictive assessments. The first thing that we give the teachers are TCAP scores from the previous school year, if they are available. The state provides those, and we provide those to the teachers. And if the student was tested in Tennessee, those scores are available. We give them a TVAS probability of success. That is a probability of whether or not a student is going to make a 3 or higher on the TCAP assessment. We give them projected state percentiles. That's provided from TVAS as well. From those projected state percentiles, we are able to give them a projected achievement level, which then kind of gives us some insight in terms of, are students making progress? Are they potentially growing? It's not end all be all for growth, but it at least gives us an indicator of how well our students are performing. We give the we give the teachers percent of students meeting or exceeding expectations. That's done at the school level by our instructional supervisor, Carrie Eldridge. And then, of course, the benchmark results, benchmark 1, benchmark 2, benchmark 3, and then a new insight that I've given them for this second benchmark are the standards proficiency rankings, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this is an example of what data each teacher gets. And they can track it. And of course, I went with all ranges, and how they did on the first benchmark, how they did on the second benchmark, and then how they did last year. So for example, that first line, the first benchmark they made a 3, second benchmark they made a 3, last year they made a 2. That's tremendous progress for that student. That probability of success for this individual student is a 61.9. So it's above 50%, so there's a pretty good chance that they're going to make a 3 or higher. The projected state percentile, which then gets converted into a projected achievement level, they're projected to make a 3. How are they doing on their benchmarks compared to that projection? We say that that student is meeting expectations. For example, the second student, and I'm not going to go through every one of these students, that second student, the projected achievement level was a 2. The first benchmark was a 1, the second benchmark was a 3. That third benchmark should give us good insight of how that student is going to perform. This helps with teachers identifying student groups, identifying intervention groups, identifying who needs enrichment, like especially the probability of successes that are 85% or higher. That's a pretty good chance that they're going to make a 3 or higher on the TCAP. So you want to grow them, you want to keep giving them extra information, and then support the students that are not projected to do as well. This is the new resource that we're providing teachers, and we take their item analysis and we can transpose it into a vertical column and then rank the standards from most successful to least successful. I highlighted just one standard because the teacher can go in, do a control, copy, find, and paste, and it will highlight where that standard was tested. So this gives good insight because if a standard was tested multiple times on one benchmark, you can see, okay, if the standard success went down, why did it go down? Teachers look at the question. Is it a harder question? Is the depth of knowledge higher? Is it at a level 2 or a level 3 versus level 1? And if you compare benchmarks, you can see are students retaining material, or are the questions on benchmark 2 a little bit more difficult than benchmark 1 if the values went down? So again, another insight for teachers. I have had a lot of positive comments based on this new report for teachers and PLCs. I've met with teachers individually to show them how they can manipulate their own classroom data, so then they can identify intervention groups and enrichment groups and really start making a lot more progress with their kids. So again, these slides I'm just going to go through relatively quickly. You've seen this for the first presentation, you'll see it for the third as well. How benchmark 1 and benchmark 2, you can see that we're making progress across the board for ELA in grades 2, 3, and 4. One thing I want to mention about grade 2, that ELA last year, I've talked to Mrs. Lockhart, and that's somewhat of an anomaly. That is extremely high achievement. 92% is an extremely high number. So what I want to focus on grade 2 is, are we improving? And we are improving with grade 2 as the year goes on, just like we are in 3 and 4, which is what you want to see. In one of the school goals for LES is to increase grade 3 ELA success rate to 77.9%. So on the first benchmark, and for a total of 207 students, we were 13.6% away from that goal. In the second benchmark, we are a few students less. We're 13.5% from that goal. So we still need to do some work with grade 3 ELA to make more progress towards that goal. Again, this was back in December, so there's been a lot more teaching that has happened since then. In grade 4, the goal is to increase the ELA success rate to 78.5. And as you can see, after the first benchmark, we were 13.5% from the goal. Second benchmark, we're only 7.8% from the goal. That's great progress, and you can see that the momentum is going towards meeting that goal, and hopefully we meet that goal after TCAP. The third benchmark should give us more insight. This was the slide in terms of students meeting or exceeding expectations. We take their projections, we take their achievement levels. Are they projected to be a 1, 2, 3, or 4? And how are they doing on the benchmarks? In both cases, we see positivity happening. In grade 3, there's 10% more kids meeting or exceeding their expectation compared to grade 4, which there's 5%. But they're both positive numbers, so what the instructional supports are that are in place tend to be working. PLC work that's in place tends to be working, at least from these graphs. In grade 5 through 8, for ELA, it's a mixture. We see a little decline in grade 6, but in all other grades, we're improving in the benchmark. Grade 8 is especially important because that's one of the focus areas that in years past it's been a little bit lower, but now it's becoming on par with the rest of them. And again, this slide reinforces that comment, is that after the first benchmark, we had 11.4% from the goal of meeting a success rate for all grades, that's 5 through 8 ELA. So that's all the kids, as you can see, 917 students that are meeting or exceeding expectations. In terms of benchmark 1, we're 11.4% from that goal. We decreased that to 8.8% from the goal. So if that trajectory continues, we should be able to meet that goal by time the April TCAP comes around. And again, this is a quick visual to show what grade areas just need reinforcement, keep doing what you're doing so that those percentages increase, and what area needs some support. And grade 6, from a quick visual, I would say grade 6 ELA needs a little extra support because they're not making any positive or negative changes. And that's a good thing that they're not making negative changes, but they're not making any gains either. So we want to identify what we can do at the school level to make sure that those kids improve between now and April. And then finally, our EOCs. And English 1, they're doing what they've done. They've been successful for the last few years. English 2, there was a slight dip, but I don't think it's a dip that is enough to cause heartache in terms of what's happening. We did have some teacher changes with English 2 from previous year to this year, so that could account different pedagogical strategies, instructional approaches, that could account for that difference. But look at this. 43% of students in English 1 are meeting or exceeding their expectation. That's incredible. 17% for English 2. So with those numbers in place, the benchmark comparisons may not be something too much to worry about if one's going down or one's going up. This is really the progress that students are making and the impact that teachers are having on their students. So what instructional supports do we have in play for ELA? I've already mentioned the pedagogical methods, but new teacher resources, assessment planning based on 3-year TCAP analyses. That's done by the instructional supervisor working with the PLCs. What standards are missed most, what standards are tested most, and let's create assessments, unit tests that mimic where the standards are taught or where the standards are assessed. And the big change for LPS, students are now using reading and writing companions, and they're writing. They're being forced to write using paper, pencil, instead of everything on the computer, and that's making an impact in terms of possible retention. So moving on to math, as you can see, same thing with grades 2 through 4. There's improvement with the benchmarks. Math 3 performed at a very high level last year. Their school plan goal is based on where they performed last year. In most cases, we want to improve the percentage by 2% to 3%. In grade 3, the goal increased by 1% because they were so high already. And to get even higher, it becomes a challenge. So where are we? Our grade 3 math success rate, that 90%, it seems unattainable. But after the first benchmark, we were 27.2% from that goal. After the second, we're only 14%. So that's a big change, and we are making the positive growth in terms of improving towards that goal. In grade 4 math, good news for the second benchmark. They've already hit their goal, and they've went beyond their goal by almost 6%. So if they continue to do what they're doing, they should do very, very well when it comes to TCAP. And again, double-digit gains for students meeting and exceeding expectations. This is all positive news, and this is the importance of benchmarking, the importance of getting a snapshot mid-year to see how our students are doing so we can respond to that data. In grade 5 through 8, in grade 5, there was no change between the first and second benchmark, And in grades 6 and 8 math, there's improvement, and that's due to the instructional supports that are in place for math. As Dr. Worrell said earlier when he mentioned Ms. Deloso, the instructional supports and the focus is on math. Math has been one of our lower areas, and that focus is intentional. That focus is purposeful. The resources that are provided for teachers, the resources that are provided for administrators are to move that bar in the math curriculum and in grades 5 through 8. We see it at the elementary school, and we're also seeing it in the middle school. With math EOCs, some of this can be explained, and I'm going to explain geometry very quickly. Discussions with the teacher. They didn't meet all the standards. They didn't teach all the standards. So that's a pacing issue. Let's review how are we doing on pacing. Let's make sure we are covering the standards that are going to be assessed to make sure our numbers change. And that was a teacher owning the data, which is something that is so remarkable that we've seen over the last few years. They own it, they respond to it, and they change their style of teaching, they change the resources that they're using. Methods for teaching may change, conversations with PLCs happen, and it's a really, truly a data-driven discussion. In here, would be a wake-up call of students. If our math success rate goal is to increase to 56.1%, after the first benchmark, we were 4.7% from that goal. But what happened in the second benchmark? We got a little bit further away from that goal. So that is something that I would recommend at the school level to, okay, what's happening? What supports need to be in place to change that trajectory so we make strides towards the goal rather than getting further and further away from it. And then Algebra 1 success rate. And that success rate, 51%, just to kind of give it some context, that's a very high goal for Algebra 1 in Tennessee. I want to say, actually I don't want to say, this is a public meeting, but the state average is not near 51%. And I know we're above the state average in most cases, but that goal is very, very lofty. But just like in many of the other content areas, we're making strides and steps towards that goal, which is what you want to see as the year is going on. And again, this slide, I immediately go to geometry, but based on what I know in terms of pacing, I'm not going to be too worried about students declining by 10%, meeting or exceeding expectations, because I know what the teacher did not teach. And it got caught up in pacing, and therefore you did not make as many gains. In the others, I'm seeing gains, and that's making me happy in terms of how I compare the benchmarks. If I see a decline, but I see an increase here, that gives me some comfort for the efforts that teachers are making. So what instructional supports are in mathematics? We see them across the board. From grade 4, math teachers attended, and actually it was both schools, what they call the Math Intellectual Prep Day at LPS. And it was vertical alignment. They were able to have conversations about what instructional strategies are being used at both schools, what is needed in 4th grade to get them ready for 5th grade to get ready for 6th, and so on. K4 teachers received math binders with instructional focus documents, and in those instructional focus documents, it opened up eyes of teachers of it's more computational and more conceptual than procedural. And at first, teachers were teaching procedures and not what I just said.
Concepts.
Yeah, content or conceptual.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. And then math walks are still being done with Dr. Thigpen, who's our state math consultant, who visits the schools on a regular basis to do walkthroughs to identify what instructional practices are working, what instructional practices are not, and that need to be changed. And then school administrators are also working with teachers to continue the transition from procedural-based instruction to conceptual-based understanding, which is what I just said. And then lastly, with geometry and possibly a few other areas, of focus on instructional pacing to make certain standards are covered prior to the assessment. Getting through the material or a majority of the material is essential for success with students. And in grade 3 through 5 science, again, it's a mixed bag. Grade 3 is slightly going down. In grade 4 and 5, it's going up. In biology, and there are no goals for grades 3 through 5 science. In 6 through 8 in biology, as you can see, it's a mix of results of some improvement and some decline, but the declines are not major declines. It's not a drop in terms of from a high value to a very low value. And then this biology success rate goal, we met it after the first benchmark. Now, did we surpass it by a lot? No, but we're at least there, and we're a little bit beyond. We went down a little bit for benchmark 2, but we're still beyond that success goal for biology. And then from here, my eyes go directly to science, grade 6, and in biology, even though it's a slight decline. What supports can we put into place for 6th grade science students and 6th grade science teachers to improve that the value or that percentage of students meeting or exceeding expectations? What's happening in grade 5 science that could potentially be replicated in grade 6? And those are some recommendations that I recommended last time, and I'm still recommending, that we want to find instructional strategies that can be reproduced across the board, because good teaching is good teaching. And when you have good teaching, good instructional methods, you're going to get results in the end. So what supports are in place for science? You have individual PLC supports. Science teachers are looking at new material, sampling textbooks, using harder concept or harder skills to vet high quality instructional materials for adoption for next year. Science PLCs revise their pacing. They recognized that in certain cases, students were not ready from a mental standpoint to handle some of the more abstract concepts, so they flipped it. So from macroscopic to microscopic or vice versa. And in social studies, which tends to be forgotten about a lot, again, we get a mixed bag. We have grade 6 and 7 improving, in grade 8 is decreasing, and US history is going to be kind of an anomaly this year. And I got permission from the vice principal at LPS to say this, because they're changing where students are going to take US history, and they're going to be in dual enrollment. If they go into dual enrollment, they don't have to take the EOC. So the few students that will take the EOC, our end count will probably not be 30 going forward, and therefore US history will not be considered tested for Lakeland school system. And again, there are no goals for social studies. There usually aren't. I would not pay too much attention to US history, but I would look at what am I doing in social studies grade 8? Why are we going down in terms of students meeting or exceeding expectations? Although it's not a major drop, it is still a drop. What are we doing in grade 7 that can be replicated in grade 6 and grade 8? So social studies teachers are still reviewing supplemental curriculum. There's a focus on PLC work. Peer mentoring is happening, especially in areas that students are not performing as well. And of course, that item analysis is being used to identify what standards need reteaching, what standards need reinforcement. And it's not just to teach the standard and forget about it, but it's constantly coming back to that standard so retention happens. So the overall recommendations, some of these are the same from last time. It's still to identify underperforming areas and then to work with the PLC groups to find instructional resources or instructional practices that can address those underperforming areas. It's to evaluate instructional strategies. What's happening in one class compared to another, one content area compared to another, and replicate those strategies as I've already said. Making informed instructional decisions and responding to the data in real time. What's happening, what is the data showing, and what can we do to improve it or to reinforce it? And then identifying standards that have not been mastered to adjust instruction through differentiation, through intervention, through a variety of practices to help raise the bar with those standards. to monitor instructional pacing. That's important because if the standards are not being taught, they're not going to be able to be assessed at a very good level. So what's upcoming? The benchmark, third benchmark already. I can't believe I'm saying that we're already in early February. The third benchmark opens late February. And I'll give that overview of how they did on that third benchmark, which should be a little snapshot into how they're going to do on TCAP. That will be presented to you in early April. And then, of course, our TCAP, which is why we do all this, why we make all the data-driven instruction decisions, and why we offer all these supports, happens starting April 16th. And that overview of the data will be given when the data gets unembargoed, and I can speak of it publicly in the fall. So with that said, do you have any questions for me?
Are there any questions for Mr. Adler? Ms. Childs?
Okay, I have several. Thank you. The first is you mentioned, I guess going forward for next school year with U.S. history, that if you take dual enrollment, you don't have to take the EOC. Is that for AP too, or just the dual enrollment?
It's for, I would have to go back and recall, it's been a minute since I've taught high school. I think it's for both, I believe, because if they're not enrolled in U.S. history, they don't take a U.S. history EOC.
AP doesn't have to take it.
AP U.S. history is not, or AP history is not considered U.S. history, and same thing with dual.
Right.
So basically, you're anticipating we will have out of a class of 200, maybe 175 or so, 175, 200 class, because I know our current 10th graders are one of the bigger classes
Right.
that like only 30 kids will be taking standard and will
Right,
not be taking,
because-
like you anticipate that many kids are going to take a college level, either AP or D.
I do, because that's the movement that the school is making, and all students that have passed English 1 or English 2 are going to be filtered and funneled into dual enrollment U.S. history. Now, I'm not saying that all those students are going to be absolutely successful on a dual enrollment.
Right, but they're choosing to take that class and they won't have
But
the
they will be
yeah.
taking that, and it also accounts for our college and career readiness, because the students, all students, or most of them, everybody that passes English 1 and English 2 will be able to get that college and career readiness check mark of taking a dual enrollment class.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fabulous opportunity. I just didn't realize it would be that amount,
Yes.
percentage-wise, of our students. That's awesome.
And
I mean-
I'm saying that just based on conversation with Mr. Waddell, but we also don't have a very high failure rate with English 1 and English 2 as
Yeah.
of today.
Yeah.
So that's why that end
I
count
mean,
would be
it's
low.
a great way to get college credits for no money from the parents,
Yes.
or very little, because they may have to buy textbooks, but they don't have to pay college tuition. So, I mean, my son signed up for dual enrollment U.S. history, so I get it. I was just surprised by the number. My next question is, you were showing the Algebra 1 middle scores, and those seem very low compared to last year's.
Yes.
Because I thought English was the only one that was comprehensive, so I thought it was like the math would be on pace. So do you have any idea why for Algebra 1 middle it's such a disparity between last year, not just last year's, but the year before scores and the current benchmark?
I can only speculate, and I can share some conversations that I've had at the school level. One, there's 80 students taking Algebra 1 middle, which is the highest number that we've ever taken. Maybe all those students were not supposed to be in Algebra 1 middle, or they can't handle Algebra 1 middle. That could be part of it. And then also instructional practices. There's been some coaching going on with Algebra 1 middle, and alignment with curriculum resources, and alignment with what works and what doesn't work, and those coaching conversations are also happening. But I think it's a mixture of both. A lot more students, but also possibly misplaced students, but also change in teaching style, because there has been a change in teacher over the last couple of years too.
Okay, and then my next question is almost like the opposite of that one. Where do the success rate goals come from? Is that us or the state? For example, on the third grade ELA, that's a huge jump. The students are already doing pretty well at 64%, and our ambitious goal is 78%, which is great. I mean, we want 100%, right? But I just mean being realistic, we have a lot of variety of students. I was just curious for that percent standard increase on that one.
Can I answer that question?
I can. Or you can.
Can I answer that question? Yeah. I worked with the team on those goals specifically. We did set very aggressive goals. I just want to be clear on that. There was an initial draft that had more incremental goals, and they are completely self-set. And our team made the decision to kind of go big or go home. And we'd rather have a high goal that we don't meet than a less ambitious goal that we can meet easily. So
I mean, we want all students to do well, so I love the high
welcome
goal.
to add to that.
Yeah, and I would like to add what Dr. Horrell said. It is done internally. The school plan is reviewed internally. It's our benchmarking, basically. It's how we're doing as a system. I don't want it to be confused with it's the state's AMO goal that they set for us. And if we don't meet AMO or double AMO, then we're not doing our job according to the state. Those goals are completely different than school plan goals. So what I showed you were the school plan goals that were developed internally.
Okay, no, that's great. And then my last question is, so when determining the individual students who need help in all of these subject areas, how exactly does that work? For the ELA, the math, at the elementary and elementary, middle, and high. How does that work? Are the students pulled out of the class and given extra? Are they offered the tutoring? I think we have the camps again, right, this summer for the students that get invited or anybody who feels they need it. So could you just speak a little bit more about that? Because I know it can be different at different grade levels.
From my knowledge, it's done a variety of ways. Tutoring gets offered to students that are identified by school administration and by the instructional supervisor, identifying various students for tutoring opportunities, and they'll look at a variety of factors: how they're doing on benchmarks, how they've done in previous years, are they making progress towards their goal, are they making progress towards their achievement level that's projected. So those are kind of the tutoring groups. Interventions and intervention groups, from my own knowledge, are developed by teachers. They look at their students, they look at students that are performing at a very high level. Those may be your enrichment group. Students in the main level, the standard level, they're doing okay, they're not doing great, but they're not doing horrible. That may be just teaching to the middle. And then you have your low groups that need remediation, and then those groups are separated out into smaller groups to get the remediation as needed to help the student make great gains.
And how does that work at the high school level? Because, I mean, they're in the class, so how does that look?
I cannot answer that
Or maybe
question.
Dr. Horrell could answer.
Say it one more time.
They do have sessions before school and after school.
Yeah, I was just asking,
Teachers do offer.
I don't have a great grasp of how the intervention works. So like at the high school level, because they're obviously in certain classes all day long. So how does it work when they need the and maybe Ms. DeLusso wants to answer.
Ms. DeLusso,
She
why don't you
jumped
answer that
up.
question? Yeah, she supervises that area. Thank you.
So at the high school level, students get credited courses for intervention classes. So if they're identified by benchmark screenings and maybe they've been in intervention, meaning they've had remediation when everybody goes somewhere for enrichment or remediation, they may have gone to specialized intervention classes. And if that's needed in the high school, they take a class and get credit for that. So there's a pathway.
Okay, if they're not in a class like that, so let's say they did okay last year, so there wasn't a reason to put them in it, but now they're really struggling, how does that work at the high school level on how they get the extra help?
Yeah, so we do the screeners there like we do at elementary and middle. And so we have a warning system type data source set up to where we're always looking at how are students doing on the benchmark assessments that Mr. Adler's been talking about. So the MVP or the CASE assessments, where we're looking at how students are doing on standards. And then, we're looking at the assessments that teachers are giving. So teachers are giving their own common formative assessments, meaning We're going to ask students all the same questions and see how they're doing. And so all that we're tracking or looking at. And students can go in and out of intervention if they need to, even if they needed to even get some extra support or get even a move into that, for
Were they
a
basically
half
like
credit.
pulled out of class? Is that how it works? Or when they need
In
this
the
extra?
high school?
Yeah, yes.
So in the high school, they would have a class for intervention if they need that. And
So
if-
would you change your schedule then if they need it and they're not already scheduled for it? Is that how they would get it?
If they needed intervention and we hadn't already put them in intervention, I would say it's really planned for as well as students who have special education needs. So if a student has more special education needs for classes in the high school and has had that, history of needing that, then we would look at that very closely at the beginning of the school year.
I'm really thinking more of, I was just curious because I just don't know enough about it. If a student's in an English or math and they don't have an IEP, they're just really struggling and making poor grades and poor benchmarks, like how do they get the intervention they need?
Yeah. So the teachers and the counselors are monitoring grades. So say a student's in a regular English class and they're not getting intervention, then they would, monitor those grades, and in the class, as the teacher is teaching during the instructional time, could help remediate some of those standards. We've also added some stipends for teachers to tutor students, and they're specifically asked to come to tutoring. And so we try to work, with the schedules for that. So we do have some before and after school tutoring that's really looking at students that might be in intervention or that might not be meeting those expectations.
Okay, and then at the elementary middle, would they get it during class time? Or how would they get the intervention if they're, again, not under an IEP, they're just, all of a sudden this year, they're doing really poorly in an English and math or, something like that?
Mm-hmm. So since it's not credit bearing like the high school, then you're able to look at the benchmark data and the data that we've talked about. How are students doing on the standards? How are they doing in the course? If all of a sudden we're seeing a pattern where a student would need help, then we have like a student meeting, kind of an S-team type meeting is what we call it, and we look at that data, and students might go into intervention. So all that means that if they're in fourth grade, for example, instead of maybe staying with their fourth grade teacher or the fourth grade teacher that's just doing general remediation and they need more specialized remediation, then during that time that all of fourth grade has intervention, then they would go to that tier 2 or tier 3 more individualized intervention.
Okay.
So it's more nuanced at the high school, certainly. I mean, the elementary school, there is an intervention block.
Okay.
Where depending on the grade level of the student.
We do things at the high school too with course recovery too. So if they're looking at grades and things like that, then we still have the similar meetings and may say, you need to really catch up on some of this first 9 weeks types of things. We have options to put students on that in addition to their classes. You just do have to find time to do that during the day, or some students come to summer school.
And also, if it's the very beginning of the school year, like let's say the first 9 weeks, and it's clear maybe the student's just placed in the wrong class, like, whether, the student wanted it, the parent wanted it, the teacher wanted it, and then it turns out like this is not a great fit, can that schedule be changed too if, let's say that, Algebra 1 in 8th grade is not cutting it and, they might need to change to 8th grade? I don't know, like, are there schedule changes possible if they're overwhelmed and it's not something they feel they can overcome quickly?
There are schedule changes possible, especially if students go into a class and may not meet certain criteria by the end of the 9 weeks. Maybe they're in more of an honors course and maybe they could go to a standard type class. Those types of things are possible. Generally, you may not try to drop a student to a lower year's math just because of the course credit. And some things we have in the high school, you might have students who need intervention math, or they might need an Algebra 1 spread out over 2 years. So we have those types of options for students with real, special situations. And we are looking to propose some options for, you might take your Algebra 1 and then following that have a math learning lab. So you're doing it, you're practicing those standards and getting it kind of a double dose of that. So we can stack things like that and kind of add those supports in and out, but you're really working with your counselors and teachers to make sure they're still getting the right credit, but we would layer in the supports or spread it out over 2 years if we needed to.
Okay, thank you. I asked so many questions, and I really appreciate it because I just didn't know that much about it. And obviously, we hear a lot more about, especially with the high school adding the D and the AP, which is amazing and great. But it's also just nice to hear about the students that are struggling on the other end of it and the services provided. So thank you for answering all my questions.
And just to add to it was the history with so we have a couple of types of dual credit with that. You have like the dual enrollment, which is you're enrolling at a college, like University of Memphis, for example, a 4-year institution, or there's also like a state dual credit, which might be students that might get, could transfer that to Southwest or something like that. So it's another layer in there. In addition to AP and dual, there's a sort of the 2-year university type credit, yeah. And then,
which I think clarifies the question. It's not that 80% or 90% of our students are going to be in dual enrollment. It's the local dual credit combination that would become more of the
because I remember
the default.
at Prep Night, y'all were
Your question that you were asking.
Yeah,
So,
no, thank you for that clarification on that too. That makes sense. But it's still a college credit opportunity.
opportunity for
But
credit,
yes,
absolutely.
it's a third type of.
4 options, it sounds like. Yeah.
4, okay. What are the 4? I mean, AP, DE, the.
You could have the
SDC.
The course where they would take the end of course test, the standard.
And the standard. Oh, okay, got it.
And
Okay.
then, yeah, the college credit options and the AP.
Okay. Thank
Are
you.
there any more questions for Mr. Eiler?
And just one more thing too, Ms. Childs, too, with that U.S. history option for either local dual credit or dual enrollment or AP, that checks the ready graduate box, whether they pass the end of the exam at the end of the year or whether they don't. So that really increases our ready graduate percentage as well.
That's great.
So it's a great approach to that course.
Ms. Thomas, you had some questions?
I do. You mentioned universal screening. So were you talking about Ames Web Plus, or what we used to use was Easy CBM? Were you talking about, did you mention universal screener, or did I hear it wrong?
I did not mention universal screener.
Okay, so what grades do we do?
I think Ms. Deloso mentioned universal screening
Maybe
as
she
part of
did.
intervention identification.
I
What
believe
grades do we-
K8.
K8?
Yeah, for Ames Web.
So I was just going to ask, it seems like that would kind of help you get them sorted in the best starting place and then see if they could move up from there in some of the middle school classes. And then I was going to ask, kind of similar to Michelle, about if a student is in LPS and the second benchmark has taken a dive or it really didn't improve any from the first one, is it pretty easy to move that student into an intervention period from, say, a MAPS class?
I don't know about the scheduling piece per se, but it does give administrators and teachers insight in terms of what supports they need to provide for those students and what supports they may need to provide for a teacher. They could say, okay, the teacher needs a little additional support or some peer mentoring, which is happening right now to improve pedagogical approaches to students that are taking these benchmark assessments. So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation, but it's the data, it's responding to the data to see where do we need to reinforce the stuff that's being done really well, and where do we need to remediate and strengthen and help bring the students up.
Okay, and then one of the most helpful things, I think, is teacher A has pretty high scores, lots of tough standards are met, with great success.
teacher B needs some of those strategies to help her kids have the same level of understanding. How much do we do to ensure that they have time to work together in these grade level, subject level groups? Because it seems, I mean, there are so many responsibilities they have, you know, in the regular classroom day, but it seems to me like that is one of the hugest ways for me as a former teacher to go to somebody and say, hey, I'm having a lot of trouble with, you know, teaching irony. What do you do? Show me what do you do?
There is an intentional approach of scheduling PLC time at both schools, which is incredible. The hard part is the human nature part of teaching. The vulnerability, anybody that studies any PLC work, vulnerability has to be shown to be able to be willing to say, I need help with this standard. And that's why the item analysis ranked from most success to least, that's as a grade level. And I told all the teachers, at least at the elementary school, I told the teachers that it's because these are our students. We don't want to look at class by class, but if you want to look at your class individually to see, okay, what standard are you struggling with or mastering that can help somebody else? And I had this conversation with a couple second grade teachers the other day. They were like, this is amazing. This is a life changer in terms of if my kids are mastering a standard and your kids aren't, what's the difference?
Right.
And those conversations are starting to happen, which, again, 3 years ago, this was my data, and this is my classroom data. I'm not going to share that. Now these conversations, the barriers are being broken down because I do believe teachers at both schools are seeing the value in what the data can provide. And I'm also going to be meeting with some LPS teachers to see what we can do to provide even more information for them, or what information doesn't need to be provided that's not useful. So we're having these conversations with the teachers at a granular level as well. So.
Okay. Any more questions? Anyone? Hearing none. Mr. Adler, thank you as always.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison.
Appreciate it. And look forward to the next one with the, I guess that is about the right time for TCAP, right? We'll get about the time it's testing.
And I'll make the request a year in advance. Can I go first next time? So I'm just kidding. You guys are all appreciated. Thank you so much.
I offered to put you on the consent agenda, but I got denied.
He tried.
Next
Thank you,
item.
Mr. Adler.
Next item is discussion on new legislative agenda items.
Is there any legislative items that we need to discuss? Then I'll make a motion to get this item on the floor.
I'll second it.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Burnett.
I just want to bring it up. With the legislation that passed, we all knew it was going to happen. It happened the way it happened. One of the things I'd like for us to consider is, as a board, we know it's not going to get repealed, it's not going away, but one of the disparities is the fact that private schools are not held to the same standards, or really effectively any standard, and our students are tested and tested and tested and tested again. When I guarantee you, Ms. Lockhart's teachers and Ms. Martin's teachers know through formative assessments how well their students are doing. And we spend an inordinate amount of time in the state of Tennessee assessing, and that takes away from quality instructional time or quality teacher development time when we know what it takes to do this. What I'd like to see is something that we advocate for: reduced assessment standards and private schools to be held to the same standards.
We have discussed this prior, but I don't know that we got that as direct and deep. Dr. Horrell, can you go back and check our resolutions we've passed before to see if we've gotten that specific? I know we've talked with legislators before, specifically, if you're going to pass this law, make it an even playing field. That was very direct what we said to their face repeatedly.
Certainly.
And that didn't happen. But can you go back and look and see if any of our resolutions, I know we've discussed it, I know we've said we all support making sure the playing field is even, so that we can communicate during this legislative session, because I know we don't have another meeting till March, since this is our only meeting, so to make sure we're able to communicate the will of the board and what our voice is from now until the end of their session, which is usually April-ish timeframe. Is that right, beginning of April? Is that about usually when they're adjourning?
I think that's about right, yeah.
I think so.
depending on the year, yeah.
Can you go back and look? I know we've discussed it. I know we've gone on
We
record
can't, and
repeatedly.
I think what I'm going to find is, I think the challenge has been that that's been a speculative proposition, like it's been an if-then kind of thing, so we have not put, I don't think as strongly as we have the opportunity to do now, what our requests would be as far as assessments relative to private schools, because our hope has been that it would be irrelevant, that we weren't being, if they weren't receiving the public school dollars, then we wouldn't be as forceful in that kind of, advocacy.
Well, so how about this? How about the executive committee can draft a resolution, I think, with the will of the board, and the executive committee can send it on so that we get it before the legislators during this session we all know what we've discussed, and have in our legislative agenda and have documented in the past repeatedly at public meetings. Would that be fair, so that we could get something to legislators within the next week or so?
And I'd say, from my perspective, what I just said or presented, it would be twofold. One, to have the same standards that held to public and private schools, but that they should also be, number two, a reduced set of assessment standards.
I don't disagree with that.
If I may,
Yes.
would this include the potential elimination of TCAP?
I would say anything could be on the board.
Yes.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
I mean, I do want to note that I did request that the legislatures have, on this voucher scholarship bill, I sent them an email, and I asked that they would, with public dollars, that at the private school, that they would have the same testing we have, or that they would change our testing to be what the private school has, but they had no interest in that. I mean, I'm supportive of, it being the same standards. I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that, if a student's not doing well in a public school and then you are able to get in a private school, which of course they can decline you based on a number of factors. But then as a parent, you don't know if they did better or not, because unlike the ESA pilot where they're required to take the same test, this one does not. But the legislators made it very clear that this was not a bill that was targeting poor families to have a better option. This was a universal bill, and that this was not to put any regulations on private schools with public taxpayer dollars. This was to have, no matter if you're a current private school student, no matter what your income level is, this was to be a universal bill, and they made this very, very clear numerous times throughout the legislation, or throughout the special session, because I watched quite a number of hours of it. But I'm not opposed at all to, saying our voice again, but they did hear our voice and decided to go otherwise with it.
Well,
Can I add something to
Yes.
it? I will note, so I just reviewed the legislative agenda that this board did pass. So there are two statements under accountability, just to review. LSS supports a fair, transparent accountability system that utilizes multiple measures to provide information to parents and taxpayers, and supports requiring any schools or districts receiving taxpayer dollars to have the same accountability system. This includes third grade promotion standards as required by state law. And then the next was LSS supports any school or parent guardian receiving taxpayer dollars to have the same standardized testing requirements and publicly post the results of schools in a manner that allows for easy, timely, and informed decisions by parents. So certainly, it sounds like one half of your comments, Mr. Burnett, are clearly included there.
I'd like to, as far as a discussion, I support the agenda now. Since the legislation is passed, I think it is important that we go ahead and put a new legislative agenda out there in order to voice our concerns. And quite frankly, I think the TCAP is unfair playing ground right now with everybody, and I feel like we need to make a push personally to amend or eliminate, which probably wouldn't happen, but the TCAP test. And Ms. Childs is so well put that there was that a lot of that fell on deaf ears, but hopefully we can bring that up and make people realize that it is truly an unlevel playing field.
Can I make a recommendation?
Yes.
I think it would be in order. for the board to make and pass a motion that, to Ms. Harrison's point, would authorize the executive committee to draft a statement on behalf of the Board of Education advocating for a reduced number of standardized assessments up to and including the possibility of the elimination of TCAP testing, and to advocate that, I don't know that the second part's even necessary, but to advocate that any school or parents, guardians receiving taxpayer dollars have the same standardized testing requirements as Tennessee public schools.
There's one I would like to add to, related to teaching requirements. The private schools have a lot more flexibility as to who teaches what courses, where, like, let's say a CTE for us, we still might have to have somebody that has some special, education degree or whatever. So it's also the teaching side of it too, as to who we can employ to teach certain courses, some flexibility there, especially for our CTE world. That would be something I would like to see included as well. I know we've talked on it here, but that, if the board is so inclined, I'd like to have that included too.
Chair, I'd like to move that we accept Dr. Horrell's written or verbal comments he entered into the record a few minutes ago, to authorize the two of you, the executive committee rather, to draft that document as the board's new legislative agenda, with those things that Braxton also included, as well as what you just added.
It sounds like the motion, that's
Yes.
the motion on the floor. So I'm assuming you're making the motion. Is that?
Jeremy?
Made a move.
Okay.
Does the motion include Ms. Harrison's third?
May I request that be a separate agenda item? Is that okay? Does it need to be included, or?
As far as the legislative,
Correct.
it doesn't have to be included, but
You mean like a separate
I'm
bullet point?
supporting
Is
it.
that what you mean?
Yeah.
I wonder if it needs to be a separate item, a separate.
You mean like a separate bullet point?
Right,
Oh, yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
a separate
Okay.
bullet point, yeah.
And I intended for my motion to include all three.
To include all three?
yes.
Okay.
Well, and I will say, I mean, there has to be some way to compare, this is going to play out over the next few years if the private schools take what the public schools are taking. I don't see a wholesale change in TCAP until they figure out, well, how are we going to see how these people over here are going to test their kids? So, I mean, I would just like to say, Ms. Lockhart, she and her staff do a phenomenal job with the kids every year, and not increasing the angst and the anxiety in that building. You walk in that building and it's like a Tuesday. I mean, it is not a stressor on the kids because of what she's established there. And I think to say we don't want accountability when TCAP's all we have right now is probably not the direction we want to go. We need some way to compare ourselves to these other kids who are being taking public funds to a private school.
The lawmakers basically said no. That's the
They
thing.
did.
So,
Which is
and-
why we're,
Well,
right.
what they basically said too was, we're going to do this, so tell us how you want it to be framed to be better for
Right.
you for operating. So that's what we're
That's what
the
we're doing.
approach. Yes,
Yeah.
because when we had the legislative breakfast, I guess it was last year or the year before, I can't remember. Anyways, that was basically the statement that they made to Ms. Childs and myself, was they're going to do this, and they don't want us to tell them don't do this, and they want to say what's going to be better for you operationally. That's what you need to approach it. So you need to stop trying to control what's going on over here.
Well, and they said in those meetings, because I watched a lot of them too, this bill's not perfect, this bill's not perfect, and okay, duh, we know that. But I do think that the push should be not to eliminate accountability, but to create parity and accountability. That's what I was getting at.
Well,
And I think that's where we're going with this, is parity and reduction. So eliminate TCAP as 100%, make it a sampling. Instead of 100%, make sure that schools are required to do an N% sampling that's a random sampling. I think that's a reduced level of assessment. That's certainly one option to pursue. I think the idea of a reduction in the excessive testing that occurs in all Tennessee schools is what I'd love to see us advocate for.
I was just going to say that they had the ESA pilot, and those students scored worse on TCAP across the state. And that was brought up to legislatures, and they were like, we're not worried about that. We're just looking at parent satisfaction scores for private schools. That's all they said that they cared to look at. What I would actually propose on the wording instead of the about the TCAP is that we use the exact same wording they used for the private schools. It was a national standardized test. So whatever that they are using, that we would switch to use that for all schools. And unfortunately, I'm not 100%, but it sounded like it was a variety depending on, there are levels of private schools, and it's level 1, 2, and 3 that can participate in the scholarship voucher. And there are standardized tests that they can choose from. It sounded like it was more than one because they didn't list a specific test. But however the wording is, I think we should put that wording. I'm not sure how to even address this, but I will also throw out last year, or maybe the year before, it runs together, but there was the huge year of the third grade retention, and the legislators said this was super important to them. But, with this, a student could, we could go through the whole process at LES, and then a student would be required by law to be held back, and then they could use the taxpayer voucher to go to a private school, and then they would not be held back. So to me, that's another layer that just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that is like another form of unintended consequences. But, again, the legislators in the session were very clear that they didn't want to put any accountability or burdens on private schools that take taxpayer dollars.
Well, and there was also the point which we've made is that some of the legislators who spoke against it said this is not a school choice bill, this is the school's choice bill, which means you can pick and choose who you want to take. And so it is disingenuous to say to parents, here's your $7,000, go and get a better education, but those schools do not have to provide special services for kids who need them. And guess where those kids are going to come back to when they realize they're not getting the special needs supports? They're going to come right back to the public school, and then we've got to figure out how to remediate what they've lost in the time that they were away from us. So,
Madam Chair, just a clarification. I understand that there has to be some testing, and I'm not, obviously, where I'm going with the TCAP, if it's just us doing the TCAP and not everyone, then that's where my struggle is. Mm-hmm. I agree, and I think we're saying the same thing. A standardized test is what I propose across the board, so I do agree with you there.
Yeah, I was just throwing out there, it might be good to use, cease, that we're asking to cease TCAP and to use the same wording that was in the voucher scholarship bill.
May I request an update on the proposal here? I just want to clarify.
But not a second.
I'm sorry, I'll second it. Go ahead. So I'll be the second, or if there wasn't a second, I'll be the second on it. Can you give us kind of the summary of, I see you have a page full of notes.
I think Keith had something he's still.
Well, I'd like clarification on where we are with, if we can reread what the
list.
The list is. Okay, we're going to go here.
I'm more sure on the first two than the
Yes.
third one, because it was
Okay.
kind of the last one added. The first one I was initially, the statement I initially made was directly from the legislative agenda as it exists now, which was LSS supports any school or parent guardian receiving taxpayer dollars to have the same standardized testing requirements and publicly post the results of schools in a manner that allows for easy, timely, and informed decisions by parents. It was a variation on that. That was in the initial motion. And then from Mr. Acton's recommendation that the Lakeland Board of Education advocates for reduced assessments up to and including the possibility of the elimination of TCAP testing. And then Ms. Harrison, after that, added reduction of teaching requirements to be more in line with private school teaching
Or
requirements.
CTEs, and I
I
say
do wanna-
specifically for like CTEs or those or not exploratory courses, things like that. Because, for example, I know I've heard, I think it was Carterville, somebody, they had and maybe it's Germantown, one of them had to stop like their aviation program because the FAA certifies somebody to teach somebody how to fly a plane, but that person's not good enough to come teach somebody how to fly a plane in the classroom, which is crazy to me.
Sure.
So there are schools that have had to discontinue aviation programs because the state of Tennessee says you have to have a teaching degree instead of saying, so that's why I say exploratory CTE, I don't know what we call them.
And maybe instead of reduction, could we say flexibility in? Because
Well, we-
we're not looking to lower the standards, we're giving.
That's what concerns me about this one, is I think you can get into a lot of nuance, and I do think if you start talking about, private schools don't have any teaching requirements. They can hire literally anybody they want to. So I don't think that's what we're talking about, and I think if you start talking about that, you get potentially pushback from our own teachers who, I think for the most part, would argue that's not what they want, and that may be exactly what we're advocating for.
But from a CTE perspective, we've had issues in the past where the state gave us a waiver one year and then we had to do something different in the middle or the next year because it was somebody who was certified and they knew how to teach this specific course, like they maybe were nursing or whatever. So I feel like I get this.
That. Like our legislative agenda says, LSS supports legislation allowing CTE professionals a simple pathway to teacher licensure through professional experience.
And that's what I feel like should be built into this, that is more similar to, or like reinforcing that maybe would be the right.
Well, and we should figure out a way to also allude to the fact that the special needs preschool classrooms have those really specific codes, right? Wasn't that one of the things that the teachers talked about when we were there, that you have to have this very specific code to be able to teach kids with a certain disability, and that probably causes a lot of problems, I would imagine, with these preschool programs across the state, with them having qualified people according to the regulations. So maybe flexibility with the regulations or something like that.
Yeah, we can certainly do whatever. This is sounding like a new legislative agenda, perhaps, that's rich with a lot of detail. I just want to make sure that this is the pathway we want to do this on.
So this would be...
We're not going to have the opportunity to come back to the board for clarification, and I want to make sure that the executive committee properly represents the feelings of all the board members, or that they at least have the opportunity for... it's one thing to take a couple of things that the board's already voted on and put that language in a new, I think, resolution. I'm just very honestly, I'm a little concerned about that we're starting to get into the details here. And if the board's comfortable with that, I will work with Laura and we will make the decisions that we think reflect the will of the board based on the conversation. We could also talk about it for,
I think I'm comfortable with as we've empowered the executive committee to do it, I think if after tonight there's a draft that we could see and we could give you individually our feedback on a draft of that before you all send it out, that would work for me.
Need to
That with me. Is that good with you?
Okay. Hearing any more discussion?
And I value your opinion on this and would like to have more conversation with you, Dr. Hoyle, just offline, and we can go through any thoughts related to this.
that works
Any
for
more?
me.
Okay. Any more discussion? Hearing none? Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Millspaugh.
Is the motion now then that the executive committee will work to develop a new legislative agenda, or is it still
It was a
I
resolution.
think it's a resolution.
okay.
Resolution.
Yes.
Yep.
So a new resolution? The legislative agenda is staying the same?
The legislative agenda is staying the same. Yeah, this would be a resolution largely based on the legislative agenda, but with a couple of other things that were discussed tonight.
Everybody clear on what we're voting on? All right, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item.
You were implying that was convoluted.
No.
The next item is a review of policy manual, section 5.
Are there any policy items from section 5 that we need to discuss?
I had a couple I sent to Dr. Horrell earlier, and I think that's it for now. It's just the first half of section 5.
Oh, yeah, to clarify, there were a couple of pieces of policy that had sunset, and actually the board had already acted on those, and it was just a matter of updating the manual. So I appreciate the policy committee bringing those to our attention. We've already passed those on to TSBA to get them removed from the manual. They were COVID era requirements that basically were unique to that time and are archaic. So thank you. Yep.
Are there any announcements? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We have a motion. I'll make the second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.